new area, Layer 2 security. We're away from a lot of the security plus theory and into some little bit of configuration, a little bit of looking at some devices, some configuration, maybe a little more fun, a couple of labs in here for this one. But configure Layer 2 security. And when we go to switches, we've talked about 802.1, actually you have to authenticate. There are a number of configurations that we're going to do in these that are available at Layer 2. Port security, which is going to be the first topic, secure MAC addresses, DHCP snooping, ARP inspection, dynamic ARP inspection, are things that can happen at, help us out, keeping users off of the network that we don't want on the network at different layers. Port security, and I've got this slide here. I think that what I want to do is go and do my story and do my demo and then come back and look at the slides. And my story is that, let's say you're the network administrator at, maybe a university, a college, a place where people come in, they bring their laptops in. You've got a wireless access point, you've got wireless routers, but they're not happy with the speed. So the user comes in with their laptop and unplugs, and let me see where this is, Fast Ethernet 03, unplugs your computer and plugs in their laptop. And now you've got a machine on your network that you don't have a clue about. You don't know if it's got viruses, you don't know if it's got malware, you don't know if there's a Trojan, you don't know if there's a worm. Whatever could be, might be on that device is now on your network. And that's a situation that we really don't want to happen. And that's where port security, the first step, I'm going to plug my machine back in here because we're going to need it on that port, where port security comes in. Port security is at its heart MAC addressing or MAC address filtering, MAC filtering on the individual ports. So what we do, and it is port specific for these things. So we can go into here and config T, and I'm just going to do the interface range of Fast Ethernet 01 to 24. And I can turn on, if I can find the 24, switch port security. And I get this error message that says that it's a dynamic port. I can't configure port security on a dynamic port. Dynamic trunking protocol is enabled. The port is in auto mode. We can't do it. So the first thing that I need to do is switch port mode access to turn it into an access port. And then I can turn on port security. What I can now do that I have it turned on, and if I do a show port security, I think that do show port dash security. Let me go back here. Show port dash security. That it's turned on, and we have some protections here, but there are other configurations that are available on it. And I'm going to go back to my interface range. So I can configure switch port, switch port security, and then the question mark, aging, if we want to do that, aging, how long it's going to be there. MAC address, where we would type in the MAC address or what kind of MAC address that we want, the maximum number or the violation. The defaults over here say that the current maximum is 1, and then the current address is, and the action is shut down. This is not the condition of the port. This is the action if there's a violation. But I want to go through and look at these things individually anyway. So MAC address, right now we're using dynamic MAC addresses where, just like we looked at them before, they come in, they get put into the MAC address table. And those are the ones that are going to be allowed on that particular port, depending on how many we say that we can have there. Or I can do the HHH 48-bit MAC address means we type them in. And you wouldn't want me to type them in. You've seen my typing skills. The other capability is sticky, and I want to do that so we can talk about sticky and see some things in it. So we're going to do sticky. What sticky is going to do is to detect the first however many are allowed MAC addresses, and well, I'm going to say stick them to the port. They're going to be associated with the port. They're going to become part of the configuration of the device. The other thing that we can do, switch port security, we have the aging, the MAC address, we have the maximum, the MAX maximum, because we have MAC address there. Maximum, and the maximum 1 to 32. How many addresses do I want on an individual port? And I'm going to leave it at 1 for right now because we're going to make a change here in a minute. And then the switch port security, and then the violation. The violation modes are protect, restrict, and shutdown. And this is one that took me a long time to figure out. These are in alphabetic order. PQRS. Q's not there, but PRS. Start with protect. Protect, security violation mode. Protect, if we configure it just simply and we get a violation, it simply starts dropping the frames. So we'll have a user, I can't get on the internet, I can't get on the network, and yeah, that might be the case because we have it configured in protect mode. We're not going to have any sort of a physical indicator that anything's happened. Restrict does the same thing as protect, but then we can configure it to send us an SNMP trap message or a syslog message to say, hey, we've had a problem. Shutdown puts the port in a sort of a shutdown mode, but it's called air disable mode. Air disable mode doesn't entirely turn it off so that we can still have the management traffic going across it from one to the other. So right now I'm going to use shutdown. What you saw was the default, but we'll see a couple of things that happen in the configuration here in the startup config file. So we have now gone through the port security configurations. It's a port specific. It's not one that we can do a default on this thing. We turn it on the ports. Which ports do we want it to be enabled on? If I go in here and do a show run, now we just say that we've got this one configuration in here, port security MAC address sticky. We don't see the maximum or any of the other things that are in here. Switch port mode access, port security sticky. If something is the default, and the default was shut down for the violation and 1 for the maximum number of MAC addresses, the defaults don't show up in the configuration files. They're kind of hidden in the operating system itself. We'll make a couple of other changes here in a minute so that you can see these things. So I don't have anything on these devices. What I want to do is, in order to get some traffic generated, and we know that the systems here in the finding the MAC address as it comes into the port, it uses the source MAC address in order to populate the MAC address table. 192.168. This was what, 1.255, I think, was it. I'm just going to ping the broadcast address and see if we can get some of the MAC address populated. And now first of all let's do the show MAC address table, and we have these things. And the gig 01, so these say static. That's because of the sticky. Stickies can be configured with an aging time, but they don't time out. Actually, stickies don't time out. They become static addresses. So we've just now dynamically discovered a bunch of static addresses. And if we do the show run, here we have the MAC addresses associated with these individual ports. And the first one that comes in is the one that gets there. So we have the MAC address and the sticky, which is not the default. The default is just dynamic MAC addresses. Dynamic MAC addresses technically would still time out, although when we configure port security, it disables timing on these things. Something that didn't happen here that you might think should, and I do think that should, but it only one of these responded, only one of them got recorded. Let's see if we can turn this thing off. IP config, and this one is 53, ping 192.168.1.52. And if I do that, you could see it turn red here. We've now attempted to put 2 MAC addresses on this port, which is only allowed to have 1 MAC address, Fast Ethernet 04. Do a couple of things with it and show you how what you have to do to get it back up. So if we do the show port security here, it says Fast Ethernet 04, the maximum number is 1, the current number is 1, and we have a security violation of 1, and the mode is shut down, so we know that it is shut down. If we do a show interface Fast Ethernet 04, and then maybe, again, I don't remember, in this one, it is now in air disable mode. It's not going to be sending data traffic back and forth, but it can send other things back and forth from those things. Which queue? What is the queue for that's not showing? I don't understand the question, Jeff, and I missed it when it happened. Okay, a while ago. Maybe we can go back to it in a little bit. Let's do this one and then what we did there. Sorry, I missed it. Was it in the is it part of the port security configuration, or was it before that?
And the letters PQRS, the Q was not listed.
Oh, okay, yeah. That was just for me for the protect. And the Q's not listed, PQR and restrict, protect, restrict, and shut down for the modes. Just the thing that I finally figured out to help me remember those things, an acronym, PQRS, Q's not there. P, protect the violation modes, protect the first one, the least severe, I guess, although it's not least severe when you can't do anything, it just drops the traffic. Maybe the least obvious. And then the restrict drops the traffic and sends an error message if it's configured to send an error message. And then shut down puts the port in air disable mode to do those things. And that was just my way of remembering. Yeah, we don't have one of the modes that starts with a Q for those things. But this one is in air disable mode. If it were shut down, I could just give it a no shutdown command. And let's do the config T to get out of this and do interface Fast Ethernet 04. If I just do a shutdown command here, it says that I didn't want to do a shutdown, I wanted to do a no shutdown. Would we have to do a shut and a no shut on it? And a no shutdown. And it changed state to up. So did it really change state to up? Because we really haven't changed anything. Let's go back here and do this again so that I can maybe not mess it up. So yeah, the two are communicating with each other on the hub, but now we can't get it across. So we're back to this device in the shutdown mode, or a shutdown or an air disable mode. And I guess what I wanted to do here, and what I did want to do here, we have this thing, change state to down, do the no shutdown. And to change state to down, you can't just go into the no shutdown mode, and we need to fix the problem. We have 2 MAC addresses that are on this interface. So what we need to do in here is go to switch port security, and change the maximum to, and let's change it to 3 just to be safe. And now I can do the shutdown and the no shutdown and do my ping here, and I shouldn't have the issue again. So ping the 1.52, and now, hey, I'm in business. And if I go back here and do the show, if I could get to here, spot type show port security, I now have 3 available on this interface, and there are 2 registered on it, and the mode is still shut down. And if I go into the show run, then on Fast Ethernet 04, since I am no longer got the default 1 for the maximum, you see the maximum in the configuration, the sticky, and then the 2 protocols. And the reason I'm trying to make a point of that is sometimes you'll see these questions is, why doesn't this show up in the configuration file? It's the default. The defaults don't show up in the configuration file. You don't see the violation mode as shut down here because it is the default. And I guess that we could do that. Do one other thing. Let's go to one of these other ports and do interface Fast Ethernet Z0/10, switch port security, violation, and let's say protect. So now then, when I do the show run, and let's get up to 10, the violation mode is now part of the running configuration file. If we have a power failure right now, all of those configurations are going to go away. What we can do is do the copy, run, start, or write, so that we make these part of the startup config file. When we do that, it's now part of the startup config file. If something happens to this, those configurations get reloaded. And now when my student comes in and disconnects my machine and connects his machine, Fast Ethernet 03, port goes down. Is it going to tell you anything? Probably not. Is it going to go in panic mode? Absolutely. Students in the past said that it's not just students that do that. Bosses do that. People bring in their wireless access point, want to plug it into the network so that they can use their wireless devices. They want to plug other devices in. This is a way, and this basically is MAC filtering on the individual ports. We can type them in if you want to do it. I always thought that sticky was the easiest way to do that. When we would configure a room to do this, we didn't do classes on Friday afternoons, for instance. You could go in and enable port security, and then make everybody, all you had to do was do a Control-Alt-Delete or a space bar in order to wake the machine up. And then the Windows systems are going to go try to do what they're going to try to do, get something. They will send the information pretty quickly to the switch, and now you've got all of your IP addresses registered. And faculty would come in and mess these, even though they knew that it was an issue, they would come in and do things and get these ports locked out. The advantage to the shutdown is you can see it on the face of the switch. The link light will turn from green to amber, so you know there's something going on and that there's something wrong on that port. My issue with, and I've done this demo with protect or restrict, is like, why isn't it working? Why isn't it working? Well, it's not working because it's just dropping them. It doesn't give you the indication with the air disable or the change, the physical change for these things. So did I disconnect him? Let's disconnect him. Let's go fix our problem here and put us back on the system. When I put us back on the system, Fast Ethernet 03, it still has the problem. We fixed the issue, but now we have to manually re-enable that port. Config T interface Fast Ethernet 03, and we have to do it with the shutdown command and the no shut command. And now my port should be back up. I said we have to manually enable it. There is an auto recovery mode that you can configure, not in Packet Tracer, that once you fix the problem and you have to define what problems you want to automatically recover from, it'll do an automatic recovery from these things, from these issues. So yeah, you can do auto recovery if you have auto recovery enabled on the device. So port security allows restrictions on the number of devices to be connected to switch interfaces, uses the MAC address of the Ethernet frames to identify the devices, has no restrictions on whether the frame came from a local device or was forwarded through other switches. What that means is that if we've got a trunk port or an uplink port and there's a lot of other traffic coming through it, then we have to make considerations for that. My thought on that, and this is back to maybe keep it simple or maybe it's dumb, but if I have port security configured on all my access ports, I don't need to do anything with the trunk ports. I don't need to do anything with the uplink ports because we've already taken care of that with the access. And as you saw, it is port specific. We just don't have to we just don't have to configure it on those ports if we don't want to configure it on those ports. So we have the ability to do that or not do that if we want to do that. I had another thought here and I forgot what it was. Maybe it'll come to me in a second. This is kind of what we did before, except in this illustration, they decided to type in the MAC addresses. I'm not real big on typing in anything that I don't have to. I kind of like to leverage and let the devices do their own thing, use the abilities of the devices as much as possible. So the first time through, we can do those things. Oh yeah, I know what the thought was with the other one. If you have, and when we were talking about voice over IP and security, one of the things slipped in there says, port security, you may have to allow more than one MAC address. IP phones are going to have their own MAC address, so we're going to have to at least have two on there, and sometimes the phone gets detected, the MAC address gets detected on both the data network and the data VLAN and the voice VLAN. So you may have to have more than one of those. If you have virtual machines running on a physical machine, they're going to have their own MAC address. So you have to take those kinds of things into consideration when you configure the maximums. Know that because I've shot myself with that one. Configured port security and then put a virtual machine on one of the workstations to do a lab, and all of a sudden the port shut down. Well, yeah, because I've now got two MAC addresses on a port that one's allowed to do those things. So each of those are going to be things that you have to consider to configure what goes on here. So port security determines which frames to filter by using the three basic methods. Limit the specific MAC addresses that can be allowed to send and receive, and here it discards to and from other MAC addresses. And you can have both static and auto-detected dynamic, and you saw that with the sticky, that the detected addresses get transformed to statics in the MAC address table and they get put in the configuration. And if we put in static addresses, we would put them into the running configuration file, and we can save that to the startup config file in order to have it available if something happens on the restart of the devices. And have you ever noticed that switches don't have a power switch on them? You just plug them in or you unplug them. They don't have on and off like a router does. But you plug them and you unplug them. So if somebody trips over the power cord, turns it off, whatever else happens, as long as we have saved that to the startup config file, all of those configurations will come back to us. Limited number of MAC addresses allowed on the interface. Discards the frames to and from the MAC addresses that are learned after the maximum limit is reached. And we can again have statically configured and dynamically discovered addresses both on the same port, as long as we have the maximums are okay. The maximum numbers are available on those things. Two methods. Switch port security maximum configuration allows the configuration of the maximums, and we did that in the demo to do these things. Normally supports 3 types of secure addresses: manually configured, type it in, stored in the address table, and added to the running configuration file. Stored in the address table is going to be the default, which is going to be the dynamic addresses, the dynamically detected addresses. And we're going to say in here, I think, that they'll time out. Dynamically addresses do time out, but when we enable port security disables the time component of it, so they won't time out. But they will go away if we have a power failure. If we restart it, then the system has to relearn all those addresses and repopulate the MAC address table. And to do that. So added to the running config file is when we use the manually configured or add it using the sticky method. They're going to remain manually removed or the configurations changed to a layer 3 interface. If we have a layer 3 switch and we change it to a layer 3 interface, then the layer 2 configuration is going to be gone. But if we change it back to a layer 2 interface, then all comes back. So it kind of keeps, it stays there hidden, but the layer 3 interface has to be is not going to be using, we're going to be using layer 3 restrictions and not layer 2 restrictions on it. Dynamic secure MAC addresses, dynamically learned, stored only in the MAC address table, dropped when the age limit is reached. Not persistent, can be converted to stickies with the switch port security MAC address sticky command. And this says it's dropped when the age limit is reached. Yes, if the age limit gets reached, but when we configure sticky, we disable aging, or sticky. When we configure port security, we disable aging in the MAC address table. Types of secure MAC addresses: dynamically learned, manually configured, stored in the table, stored in NVRAM but not displayed in the running configuration file. When they're disabled, not persistent, does that mean it's not saved? Yes. If they're not, if I hadn't made it sticky, and we can go back and do some of that. Let's go in here and see what we can do with these things. So we'll do ND and show run, and we have sticky on all of these things. Let's put this less. Do maximum 3. Let's do fast Ethernet 03. And let's go to config T and do interface fast Ethernet 03. And I may have to do a couple of things. Switch port security. And we'll do MAC address, and in here let's just do no switch port security, no switch port security MAC address sticky, and C do show run, and now the sticky should have come off of fast Ethernet 03. So I don't have anything on this thing. So I have switch port security. No other configurations. So this guy, let's have him ping 150. Let's try 53. So I can ping 192.168.1.53, and we're getting there. And now go back to my switch, and I want to start out with the I'm going to go in. Let's show the MAC address table. So fast Ethernet 03 in fact has an address on it to do that, and it is, it says it's a static address, and the reason it's a static address, it shows as a static address, is the configuration. Since I have port security, the timing, the lifetime countdown timer is stopped on this thing. If I do the show run, fast Ethernet 03, I don't have anything associated with it. Now let's see if I've lied to you, and it may be a packet tracer thing. Let's do a reload here. We did a copy. I'm going to say configuration's been changed. Save it. Let's say yes on that, so that I get that the configuration, the sticky would have been in the startup config because I saved it after it was there. So now then, show MAC address table. Fast Ethernet 03 isn't there because it went away. The other ones are. The ones that have sticky configured on them stay there. The one that I went back and changed and took the sticky off, we got the MAC address in the table was associated with that one, showed as a static, but when we reloaded it, it went away because it's the default, the dynamics. The dynamics are not persistent. They're not going to be there when it comes back. When we do, they're not persistent, doesn't come back, and just as you have probably seen, I'm kind of a show me. I like to show me because I am dense, not show you, but show me, to convince myself of a lot of these things. But when it's disabled, stored in NVRAM, and this is one that doesn't make any sense. The sticky secure MAC address is stored in NVRAM but not displayed in the running configuration file. If we store them in NVRAM, the way we get them into NVRAM it does make sense. Stored in NVRAM or not stored in NVRAM, but displayed. The way we get them in VRAM, non-volatile RAM, with the startup config files, the copy run start, it has to be in the running config file. The stickies are going to go there. You saw that, and NVRAM would be the MAC address table was there. That was where it was stored. But when we restarted this thing, the dynamic addresses went away. They'd have to be redetected when we go from one to the other. So can they be saved or can they not be saved? The running config file, the NVRAM, the static, and the stickies are going to be there. They can be saved. The dynamic is going to be, all of them are going to be in the MAC address table, but the dynamics are only going to be in the MAC address table. And this is just the steps that we did, the commands that we used in order to configure port security that we had. Guidelines and restrictions, and there are some restrictions that go on with this. Can only be configured on static access ports. That's why I tried to configure it on a dynamic port or static trunk ports. No dynamic ports. Voice VLAN is only supported on access ports. the voice VLAN, the phones, and again, we may have to configure, or we will have to configure a maximum of greater than 1 when we have the phones enabled on these things. Dynamic port security is automatically enabled on the voice VLAN, and an IP phone will require up to 2 MAC addresses, one for the phone and one for the PC. And again, sometimes the phone gets detected on both of the VLANs. Cannot use as a port for a span. Span is switch port analyzer or port mirroring process where we can see the traffic on one port, watch it on another port, do a port mirror. That's one way around being able to see the traffic, because the objective of the switch, one of the objectives of the switch, is to be able to minimize where the traffic goes. It only goes to the 2 directly involved MAC addresses to do these things. Switch port analyzer is what it stands for. This port mirroring probably makes sense. If we have this configured, and I'm not sure that we've got a lab to do that. There's a packet tracer one. It's something that's pretty straightforward. I'll do one after lunch because I want to get this one done so we have lab time and then lunch. What Switch port analyzer does, if we enable the session, we can watch the traffic on port 1 on port 2. And then we could be running a sniffer here to see the traffic going in and out. Somebody has an issue, you're trying to find something, you want to spy on somebody. In the hub, everybody sees everything. In the switch, you only see the traffic to you and the broadcast traffic, unless you have the ability to configure a span port, a sniffer, a mirror port, to where you mirror all the traffic on one to the other. It sends a copy of all the traffic from one port to the other port. Maximum secure address value for an interface. When changing it, the new value that is greater than the existing value will override it. We saw that. Unless it is lower than the error configuration. In other words, if I had 2 of them on there, I can make it 3 because it was above, and it would fix the error. If I had 3 of them on it with and tried to make it a maximum of 2, it's going to reject that value. Static secure and static secure MAC addresses cannot be configured on a voice VLAN. Do not support port security aging on sticky secure MAC addresses when we do those things. Dynamic MAC addresses learn dynamically when the age limit is reached, but it does disable aging, and the default age limit is 300 seconds for these things, 5 minutes. Can be configured on each interface. We can change. Aging is something that is a configurable is configurable from 0 to 1440 minutes. If we configure it as 0, then the aging will be disabled for that. Methods by which the devices, the MAC address, the methods for the MAC address inactivity, and we've looked at these in an absolute. Inactivity, if it's not used, if it's reused, the timer gets reset absolute. It starts at the 300 seconds and does the countdown timer for it. But again, when we configure port security, aging gets disabled. Default value is 1. We've seen that a couple of times. Switch port security, MAC address configuration, to statically configure the secure MAC addresses, and port security, switch port security MAC address. VLAN range configuration command from the trunk port, so we can configure it to accept VLANs when we do these things. Port security to use the MAC addresses of the connected devices to dynamically configure these things, and then the static allows us to reset to the dynamically configured. A number of different ways, and all of this is how are we going to get the MAC addresses associated with the ports that are available for there. Yes, no in front of the command line to undo it. No in front of whatever I did. If I wanted to, and one of the things to consider here is I have mine going great and the NIC fails, and if I change the NIC, I've now got to go back and change the port security. I have to use the no command to take that sticky address off of the system in order to allow the new address to become part of the port security. So, and that doesn't happen a whole lot anymore. Violation modes, if we move from one to the other, the events will trigger violation mode. Violation triggers here. The maximum number is reached. We did that. We saw that on a secured port. The maximum of addresses, then it's going to trigger whatever violation mode that we've configured on it. When a secure MAC address is learned on one secure port, attempts to access a different secure port in the same VLAN, it's going to be a violation mode. It's called a MAC move violation. The switch will actually recognize that it's a valid address and will move the MAC address to the new port, but it is still considered a violation, called a MAC move violation when we do those things. The violation modes, the protect, restrict, and shut down. And then is traffic forwarded, and the answer is no for each of those. Are we going to send an SNMP trap? No in the protect, and yes for the restrict and the shutdown. Syslog messages, same as the SNMP, an error message, no on each of those. Does it increment the violation counter? Protect is no and yes on the other two. Port shutdown. In the shutdown mode, port shutdown, it's not technically shut down because we still have some information sent back and forth with these things. It's error disable mode, which technically is not shut down. We're still not going to be sending any data traffic from one to the other. Disables learning of any VLAN. Protect disables learning from any VLAN, drops traffic from the offending devices until the addresses drop below the maximum value. We don't get any notifications for this one. Protect does the same thing. The protect not recommended on trunk ports will drop until no notification. 3 violation modes. And I guess that I went backwards and forwards on that one. Restrict, same as protect, except it's going to send it's going to send you a message if you configure it. No in front. Is there an example of why you would use protect? If you didn't, I guess if you didn't want to go through the process of going through the shut and the no shut command, because once you will drop the frames until the addresses drop below the maximum. We're going to get into more of an auto config, and I'll try to set one of those up and see if that actually happens. Packet tracer, again, sometimes does what you expect and sometimes doesn't. But no notification. It's kind of the silent killer here. I always use shutdown because I like to be able to see the light change to amber and say, oh yeah, I know I've got a problem with that. I know why they're not getting on, because of the port security. Could be other things, but the port security to do those things. Error disable state shuts off the LED. It'll change from green to amber, and to me that's what I like, because I can see physically that there's something going on the device for these things. Switch port mode access, the main steps to configure it, which is what we did, switch port mode access or switch port mode trunk. We have to manually set the mode for these things. It can't be in dynamic mode. Use the switch port security interface subcommand to enable port security. Optional steps to configure these things, the ones we did, the maximums, the violation modes, even though I set it was the default. Port security MAC address to predefine to allow MAC addresses on these things for the selected interface. Receive a message, yeah, somehow someone's trying to plug in, yeah. You can if you use just the drop. If you use the restrict mode, you can get an SNMP message. And I agree with what he said. I like to get a message. I like to have an indicator that something wrong has happened, and something wrong has happened. The shutdown mode will do that for you when we do those things. These are separate from an IDS or an IPS when we look at those things. The IDS is a kind of a passive thing, tells us that something happened. An IPS allows us to block things, but generally on those we're looking at layer 3 for the traffic that we're looking at and that we're trying to prevent or report for those things. I cannot answer that question. I've not tried to put an IPS on a switch to see if that happens or doesn't happen. We can get SNMP messages when ports go up and ports go down. The problem with that is every time you shut down a Windows machine and it goes inactive, it shuts down the NIC and the port's going to go in a down mode to do those things. So there are a number of things that do that. What this one does, you can configure it if you just want to drop them so that you can get a message. It's a layer 2 protocol that we're sending the information from one to the other when we go from one to the other. The sticky we looked at when we did those things. Error disable mode exists when a security violation occurs in the shutdown mode. Effectively shut down, then the LED will be turned off and we will see error disable. We can again configure auto recovery, but it goes back to Michael. I do like to get a message, and I'm with him. I want to get a message. I want to be able to see something that says that there has been a problem going on. There are lots of issues you're talking about. Can detect somebody plugging into a device. That's why anything that's in an area that you don't want them to plug into, you should use the manual shutdown command to do that, so that you make those ports unavailable to individuals. In this case, we're just trying to protect ourselves based on the MAC address that our devices are the ones that are on the switches. It's not hard to unplug one device and plug in another device from one to the other. And once this is configured, we can allow those things to happen. Yeah, it'll give you all of the information, the port number and the MAC address, the actions that have happened, so you know where the issue is. If you can see the switches, it's not real hard to figure out where the issue is, because you look for the amber light that should be green. Everybody else is green. You got this one amber. You know where the problem is. And you can always use the show command to do that. When we get into automation and we can look at a lot of things in the controllers, we can look at a lot of things simultaneously. You can get those indications on the switches. The show port security command will tell you that it is in a violation condition for them. Alerts to the administrator to a port problem. The two purposes: the error disable mode, show interfaces for these things, and it prevents erroring the port from causing other ports to fail, which could happen on these things. Error disable recovery mode, I referred to it a little bit earlier. You got to identify and correct the root problem. If I got too many devices, and this will go back to the question, the wrong guy plugged in and now the right guy plugged in. Once we've corrected the problem, it can do an automatic recovery, that we don't have to go in and do the shut and the no shut on the situation to do those things. So my guy that plugged in, if I had error disable recovery mode, once the correct device was plugged back in, if this is configured, it would automatically bring the port back up. The MAC for the PC, I don't know if that would be in the trap message or not. I think the trap message, I don't know. and I won't even guess on that one, Michael. I mean, the thing that we want, the thing that we're trying to configure here is to be sure that we are getting the devices that we want connected to our devices, and not the intruder, or not the student, or not the whoever has just decided that they can just plug their machine in, or plug their wireless in. If you plug the wireless in, you're going to get all of the different wireless devices. Those MAC addresses will try to get through the system. If the port is enabled prior to fixing the root problem, it's going to just be error disabled again. And that one I tried to show on when we had the two trying to get on the system. The error disable recovery show, and then we have to specify the reason that we want it to do an automatic attempt to do the error recovery disable. And a number of these things we haven't really talked about. UDLD is unidirectional link detection. Back to the fiber, we have a transmit fiber and a receive fiber. It's more likely that one of those could be broken, and this would just be for a one-way communication. We're not getting both the transmit and the receive. One of the fibers has been broken for these things. BPDU guard we'll look at this afternoon. Security violation is one of those things, and you have to enable each of the things that you want the error disable, the auto recovery to be effective for. To do those things. A time interval, so it'll try every 5 minutes. It'll try to fix the problem, to do the auto recovery for these things. And if the issue's been fixed, we don't have the wrong MAC addresses on the security violation. If that error has been corrected, every 5 minutes it'll try to do that. And if the problem's been corrected, it'll automatically bring the port back up so that we can use it. First, identify and correct the root problem. If it's re-enabled, it just goes back into the state. And we saw that, I think, for the manual attempt to recover these things. Ports will still be disabled if error disable has not been configured on the switch. Error disable default interval is 300 seconds. It is disabled by default. It's not on. There's something that we have to configure, and you can configure the timeout interval for these things. If it's disabled, which is the default, we have to re-enable ports with the manual method. Fix the problem, and then if it's in the shutdown mode, do a shutdown and a no shutdown. The shut and no shut command. Bounce the interface is the common term for those. The default port security configurations is disabled on a port by default. The default number of secure MAC addresses is 1. The violation mode is shutdown. Aging is disabled by default on these things, and the aging type is absolute. Static aging is disabled, and you say static aging, you can configure a static address to have aging on it if you want to. And sticky aging is disabled when we enable configure port security. So we are up to a couple of labs, Switch Security 1 and Switch Security 2. For these things, and they say 35 minutes, say 30, so we got lunch coming up. I'm just trying to get there for an hour, so an hour would be 12:30 to 1:36. Let's say we'll come back at 1:45 Central and 12:45 Mountain from lunch. I think that does it right. Other questions, and hopefully I did kind of answer the questions that you asked in the chats.